It's Sunday, February 26, 2023. Welcome to The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can subscribe to my work and get exclusive access to bonus content, live Q&As, and more at patreon.com/5Minute News. Joining us today is Democratic strategist, war room vet, and founder of NDN, a leading liberal think tank and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C., which this week he announced he is winding down. Simon Rosenberg, welcome to The Weekend Show.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much, Anthony.
Just very quickly tell us why you are changing direction with your career and why you don't think there's kind of room for that type of think tank at this moment in history.
Well, NDN was built in a different era to achieve different things. And I think that it did its job. And for me now, particularly given the battle that I had with the red wave over the last year or so, my own understanding of what needs to be done now to defeat MAGA, to preserve our freedom and democracy here and around the world, to tackle the emergent challenges, that we all, I think, have to approach this in a different way. And I think that for me, I needed an organization that wasn't a 501c3, C4, which, is very limiting in many ways in terms of what you can do with it and how you can speak. I needed a different way of engaging. And I'm going to be doing the same work, but from sort of a different place, if you want to say it that way. And I don't exactly know how, but one of the things I want to do is I want to dive into this new media world, and the world of MeidasTouch and Substack and, post Twitter and wherever we're going from a communication standpoint. I want to just dive deeper into that world and surf it a little bit and understand it and innovate through it with all of you. And so those are my thoughts. I think the challenges facing us, I think we're the last point I'll make is I think we're ending a long era of American politics. We had the Cold War era. I think we had this age of globalization. I think potentially a year ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, that age of globalization came to an end. And we're now at the beginning of the next era of American politics. And I think we need to be focused more on the future than the past and to build a new politics around these new challenges. And so I need to do that, I think, in a different organization, different way than I was. And I'm really excited about it. It's hard. I built this thing. It's been around for a long time, but I'm ready for the next chapter.
It's so interesting, isn't it, how all of the kind of news viewing is happening through YouTube now, and there is this shift away from legacy networks. And I spend most of my time watching YouTube. That's kind of where as well as making programs for YouTube, I spend most of my time watching it. And, there is... It's kind of very much of the time, isn't it, that we are giving up on some of these traditional institutions because it's not that we've lost their trust or they've lost our trust, but it's like there is an evolution in everything, especially media.
Yeah, I think we're going through a really profound change in the way that we all talk to one another. And I think that, we had the internet come in the 1990s, and then the social media age came, and I think we all have deep understanding of the limitations of social media. I think there's an urgency to move past that into whatever this next age is. I've had 3 teenagers, and the perniciousness of social media is clear. And also, obviously, for many of us who were Twitter folks, Twitter has become an uncomfortable place now for us, given Elon Musk's politics. And so I do think that there's, I did an event recently with Ben from MeidasTouch and Joe Trippi from Resolute Square and Tara McGowan from Courier Newsroom and David Rothkopf from Deep State Radio. And I did this event because I wanted to help show that there is innovation happening, that we aren't just victims of sort of a bad media environment, that people are actually pioneering and building this next thing. I need to be more part of that, right? This is part of the reason I want to move to some kind of different way of engaging. And I think you're right, Anthony. I think there's more innovation and change happening than people really understand in Washington. I can speak for kind of the typical Washington Democrat that really is unaware of what you're describing and still sees the Washington Post and MSNBC as sort of the places you go to reach people. And we know that's just not true anymore. And
is that kind of exclusive to Democrats? Because
Yeah.
Republicans have recognized the change.
Yeah,
Donald Trump used
we're behind.
Twitter as his communicator.
Yeah, the Republicans have information superiority over us right now. There's just no question about that. Right? Like they're ahead, despite the fact that our young people are much more democratic, and you would think that our audience would have driven this change more. We are behind. I mean, they have information superiority over us, and part of my job and what I've been doing is trying to help Democrats understand that we are behind in the information space, that we are in a different kind of politics now. And it goes back a long way. I mean, in the United States, I mean, one of the things I learned when I first started NDN in 1996 was I interviewed candidates, and we were a PAC originally, and we would endorse people. And in every interview I did, it was almost inevitable that it became clear that Rush Limbaugh, who at that point was reaching 20 million people a week when only 70 million people were voting, right? That Rush Limbaugh's name came up in every interview. He was a major presence in the head of people, particularly in swing districts, right, where I was doing a lot of my work. And it became clear to me even then that what had happened pre-Fox was Republicans had expanded the understanding of what politics was. And now media was part of their politics. Today, you could argue that the single most powerful institution on the right is Fox News. I mean, it's now almost become absurd how the media has actually become their whole politics, right? And there isn't really a traditional political party anymore. The GOP is not really something that really looks like a traditional political party with an agenda and a platform and all this, right? I mean, they don't have an agenda. They don't have a platform.
Well, they're a media organization, really, aren't they? I mean, that's what they are.
Yeah,
they're a media movement.
It's a media movement. It's become, I mean, they're not a political party in the way that we understand political parties. They're something else. I mean, I've been using this analogy of them being it's the Wizard of Oz, right? And that 10 days ago the curtain started getting pulled back on Fox. And look, I was a regular guest on Fox for 17 years. I did thousands of appearances on all the shows. I was one of the Democrats that they could tolerate, and I did it for free. And I did it in part because I wanted to learn about them and their world to make me better at what I do. But I also wanted to be an ambassador, right, from the Democrats to Fox to show that we're not all crazy and everything else. But the Fox changed. I mean, when Roger Ailes was pushed out and died, I think that the Fox went from being sort of a conservative Republican organization to a MAGA entity and became more unhinged, and it's become dangerous as opposed to conservative and reactionary. And I think that that's a recent development, and I think it's eaten the entire Republican Party, basically. I mean, Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity are more powerful than virtually any Republican politician.
With a direct line to the former president. I mean, that was now clear through these text messages that we're starting to see from around January 6th. They were worried they were going to lose their audience if they called the election for Trump. I mean, but still, despite this stuff that's come out, that messaging will never make it to Republican voters, because I don't hear Democrats talking about it. I don't hear it being weaponized by the left in the same way that similar things might be weaponized by the right.
Look, we have to get smarter about the information space. I mean, we are operating with an antiquated understanding of how opinion is made, how messages move. I mean, this is part of the reason I need to go do what I'm going to go do, whatever it is. I've been very inspired, frankly, by MeidasTouch and the innovation that I see. You guys do extraordinary work, but we have a lot of work to do. We're behind. I mean, look, we've governed well. We've had 3 consecutive really good presidents, right? We've made the country better than every time we've been in office. They've been a wrecking ball on our politics. I mean, what they really have is this loud, noisy right-wing machine. They have the Wizard of Oz. And we've got to match it. We've got to grow up and build a much louder family. And my view, there are 2 ways in the short term we have to get louder. One is through the growth of organizations like MeidasTouch and Courier Newsroom and Deep State Radio and Resolute Square, these institutes, media, or we need our own media organizations. The Republicans have their own media. We need our media organizations to get louder. But also there's a role for every person who's watching tonight is that I'm challenging our family to learn to become information warriors, to not feel like this is somebody else's job, for all of us to get up every day, being a little bit louder, not being annoying, right? You don't want to bug your friends, but 4 million, when we built the War Room in 1992, it was, 20, 25 people in a room trying to change the way that campaigns engage in the information space. That was what we tried to do. Now I think we have to think of the War Room as 4 million people, proud patriots getting up every day, learning the issues, spreading good news through their networks, countering the darkness and the negative sentiment with more positive sentiment on our side. There's a lot we can do together to take back our discourse. And part of what I'm trying to do is give people a permission structure and encourage them to try it out, right? We've built very muscular campaigns. We're raising tons of money in our campaigns, but their side operates 24/7, 365. And we have to be less campaign focused and more focused on the day-to-day. And I'm confident that if we really set our minds to this, right, that we can make enormous strides in the next few years. We're not powerless, but we won't make these strides unless we try. And so it's part of what is my repositioning of myself, right, is becoming more of a Pied Piper about this need to understand the information superiority the right has and come up with a strategy to close the gap.
I'm not convinced. I just want to play devil's advocate for a minute, just because it makes this conversation more interesting. But I'm not convinced that alone will work, because I really feel like there is this kind of miscommunication that exists between the left and the right that no one seems to be dealing with. And that is that the stuff that the right is peddling is often not true. And there is nobody really on the left, and this should come from the executive branch, really. I mean, it's a great job for the vice president or similar to actually have, almost like they had a coronavirus task force, to have a misinformation task force, to do a weekly press conference where you list all of the things that are the Republican talking points and you explain to the public, to all people, why these items are inaccurate or misinformation. I mean, is it possible to be that direct?
I think we have to be. I mean, I think that this is part of us being behind, is that I do think that there has to become soon a moment, as we call it, in the McCarthy era, right? There was this "how do you know decency, sir?" moment. We really have to start challenging Republicans in face-to-face settings to be like, you got to be kidding me. You got to stop peddling this horse shit, right? You can't continue to lie to the American people. I mean, what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, was another. I mean, to my view, what I think is happening right now is that the way I describe this is that their entire politics is about maintaining this set of fictions about the Democrats in the country and Joe Biden that then drives their response, right? We're a radical left, we're dangerous, we're failed the country. All these stories then feed into their politics, and they need that radical left dangerous story to be there as the organizing principle for their politics. And the problem is none of that is true. To your point, it's not true. We're not a radical left party. We're not Antifa. Joe Biden's been a good president. The country's far better off. I mean, all these things. And so what's happening is that their desperation in maintaining this false narrative, I think, is growing. They're becoming more desperate as it becomes clearer and clearer that it's not true. And that Joe Biden, in his sort of weird normie way of just getting up every day and doing his work and, not being the most powerful communicator in the world, is starting to blow them up. And so now we're getting like the wild insanity around East Palestine. We're getting the debt ceiling thing, which is just completely out there. And I think that what we're seeing is the curtain is being pulled. I think that they have nothing. They have more, they have nothing every day. The effort is required to maintain this sort of false narrative about us is the machine that's generating that is getting more and more desperate, more and more money. And I think we should look at them as, I think we're on the verge of something where, to your point, we have to start pounding them for doing this as opposed to being a traditional political party that's trying to make the country better. And that this is an ongoing betrayal of a democracy. I mean, a democracy can only be successful if people have accurate information and can make intelligent choices. When one of the two sides is spending all their day lying to everybody and putting poison into the information space, it degrades democracy itself. And we have to figure out how to talk about this. And we're far away from it.
Yep.
So you know from having lived abroad that the conversation in Europe about hybrid war, about disinformation is far more advanced than it is here. We have virtually no broad conversation happening in the United States about the ability for information environments and systems to get degraded and to be poisoned. And I'll give you an example of that, right? So I got some notoriety over the last few months over my battle with the red wave, and
you predicted that it would not exist, or it wouldn't be a thing,
right?
And you were one of very few people
right.
that predicted that, yeah.
Right. And the thing that happened is, imagine if virtually every commentator who writes and comments about politics got something really monumentally wrong. You would assume there would be some kind of process for self-reflection, yeah. for thinking about, like, how did we get this wrong? How did we mislead the American people? We have an obligation as news organizations to tell the truth, and we actually misled people. I think the misleading in the red wave probably cost us the House. I think that was deeply consequential. This was not sort of a sideshow. This was central to our politics. And there's no self-reflection. There's no acknowledgement in the current national discourse that information can be manipulated and that there's a game afoot here. And to your point, it is important that the Democrats learn how to talk to the public about this, right? And to talk about how our information systems have been degraded and polluted and manipulated, and that you are being lied to. And I think that my hope is the Biden administration gains more courage in doing this, because it's a break, right? You don't want to look like a conspiracy theorist, or you don't want to call out. But I think we're at a point where we have no choice.
But he did it in the State of the Union.
It's all they are now. It's all they are. It's all they are.
He called them out in the State of the Union address. He came off the script. He literally pointed to individuals who were talking about taking, yeah. Medicare and Social Security and taking them off the table. I mean, he was right. And actually, that was one of the great Joe Biden moments, wasn't it? Because that actually proved to all of the haters that, despite his speech impediment and he's not a great public speaker, but he actually is as sharp as they come, because it's much harder to come off script and do something as targeted and focused as that. It's a huge risk to be able to kind of take 500 people and communicate with them. It was like a comedy club. It was like a stand-up comedy club. It was amazing the way he kind of harnessed everyone's interest. And even the few Republicans that were asleep suddenly woke up. And, how do we get Biden and those around him to do more of that? Because it's that space, that kind of impromptu space, that when it's done really well can pay dividends. The downside to it is that the risk is sometimes not worth taking.
Look, I think that part of the reason I'm closing NDN is that as I said at the beginning, is that I think there are three big things we got to do now that are different than what we had to do before, that our politics are changing and we need innovation and thinking around these new challenges. One is that we have new governing challenges, that we have this conflict with Russia and China, and that this age of globalization where we all thought we were all going to be on one team working together is ceding to this next an age with more conflict. We have the challenge of climate change, which is really so all-encompassing, existential, that has to be the center of everything we do. And we need to protect Biden's economic agenda to make sure the Republicans don't sabotage the good work that we did in those three big bills that we passed that will make America strong and prosperous for a generation. That's the governing challenges. The second thing I think we have to do is to think about how we get to 55% nationally. If we're going to defeat MAGA for good and loosen MAGA's dark grip on the Republican Party, they have to be beat badly. They can't just be beat by us falling over the finish line at the end. in the kind of elections we've had. They have to be more definitive. We need to start putting enormous effort into thinking about how we get to 55, not 51. I think a big chunk of that is increasing the participation of young people who are overwhelmingly Democratic. There are things we can do, but it's about strategy, it's about learning, it's about money, it's about a game plan, right? The third is this information space. We have to figure out how to be better. I mean, we have to be louder, we have to be smarter, we have to be more competitive. They're ahead of us. And it's all the stuff you're talking about, right? It's loudness, it's strategy, it's about being more conscious of the game. It's about giving permission more to our supporters to be loud and to engage in the discourse. It's about me being here with you and promoting your work. We have so much work to do here. And because what happened in the election, right, is where there were two elections. There was a bluer election inside the battleground, a redder election outside the battleground. Inside the battleground, where our campaigns had a lot of money and more than Republicans, we were able to control the information environment. We were able to label them as being out of, too MAGA for you, and to sell our good work and what we did. And where we controlled the information environment, we were able to push our voters through muscular campaigns. We actually gained ground from 2020 in 7 key battleground states. But where we didn't have those big muscular campaigns, we actually lost ground. It was a redder election. And so the warning to us is that, look, we can forestall some of the worst of MAGA by continuing to focus in these 7-8 states, control the battleground, win the presidency. But if we don't also start getting better and more competitive in the daily information environment, we're going to have a hard time in the Senate races and even potentially winning back the House, because, we have to do both, and we can do both. And I think it's a really major priority for us going forward.
Is part of the problem that there isn't an equivalent to MAGA on the left? So MAGA is quite easy to define, right? It's people who see Trump as the second coming. They're anti-abortion. They don't like trans people. They want to make America white again. It's pretty cut and dry, whereas Democrats by definition are nuanced, and their views are, varying levels, but they're just generally want everybody to be able to live together harmoniously and not worry that somebody else's business is their business, because most of the Republicans who are complaining about trans issues have never met a trans person. I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? So how do you market the Democrat side when there isn't a kind of, a simple communicative tool like MAGA and the hats and the branding and all of the stuff that Donald Trump does so well? Because really that's what this is about, isn't it? It's about kind of having an even keel on both sides.
Well, my view in the short term, and I don't know that I have the answer to you, because I think we also have to reject the kind of extremism, right? I mean, the lesson can't be to match their extremism with our own version of that.
But they're not all extremists, are they? They've just jumped on that bandwagon because there aren't any other options. I mean, why can't Joe Biden say, join us? Well, nobody has to know what you're doing in the polling place or what box you're marking. Do it in secret if you have to.
So first of all,
there's nowhere else for these moderates to go.
Right. So first of all, I mean, in general, right, I mean, Democrats we've won more votes in 7 out of 8 national elections. It's the best run of a political party in American history. We've done very well in these last 3 elections. I mean, we're doing pretty well, right? We can do better. And I think the key to me in the short term, tactically, is that we have one big job to do in terms of communications in 2023, which is we have to get people to understand this fundamental contrast between us doing a good job governing and them being a wrecking ball. If you look back to 1989 and the end of the Cold War and when globalization began, this new age began, there have been 48 million jobs created in America. 46 million of them have been created under Democratic presidents. We've basically, all the economic growth that's happened has happened when we've been in power. There have been 3 consecutive periods of robust growth, 3 consecutive periods of Republican recession. And we've, this contrast between us governing well and them being, not doing their part is, to me, the most fundamental kind of information that we can put into the voters' heads that, we've been a good party, we've done a good job, we left the country better than we found it, they've continued to screw everything up, and they've gone crazy, right? And that contrast really has to start with the economy. we're down on the economy, even though they've been atrocious. Trump had one of the worst economic track records in American history. Before him, Bush had one of the worst economic track records in American history, and our presidents have done a good job. Voters still trust the Republicans more in the economy than we do. And
because they think they're business people and they're business minded and they run businesses.
And I think that Biden in the election, if you go back and look at the data from the election, Biden spent most of his time talking about COVID and not about his economic agenda. And I think where voters ended up was he's going to go defeat COVID, but maybe he went a little bit too far and shut a little bit too much down. And so, maybe he wasn't as concerned about working people as he should have been. And I think that he entered office in a place of enormous deficit on the economy. It's something that I think that is not well understood. And he's not ever been able to get back to a place of being even. And I think that to me, when I get asked about how do we win in 2024, the most important thing we can do this year is get to a positive place on the economy. If we can end the year beating, trusted a little bit more than the Republicans on the economy, I think we're going to have a good year next year. If we don't, it just gets harder. I mean, it is the number one, number two issue for voters. We're underperforming there. And I think to your point, that opens up lots of other doors. And also, you look at independent voters, right? They're not with us in the economy, but they're with us on abortion. I mean, they really reject the kind of extremism of the right, the illiberal anti-democracy stuff, abortion. Independent voters understand that they've gone too far, but they got to make a living, right? And so to me, if I could wave a magic wand and I could do one thing, we've got to go sell our economic record with everything we got. We got to have this debate over the debt ceiling and crush them in this economic and fiscal debate we're going to have. And we need every Democrat in the country helping us make this argument to their communities and their friends, because we have a powerful economic story to tell and we just haven't told it well. And so that's where I hope, to your point, if we can be the party that makes people's lives better, that isn't getting in your business, right? Simple stuff, normie stuff, right? Not like pie in the sky, we're going to have a silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. I have this belief from having done this for a long time that what people really want out of their leaders is to take care of business, make things better so they can go be with their families and not worry about anything.
But they also need to be told, don't they? And that's really maybe what's missing, is that Trump did nothing and told everybody he was doing everything. And Biden's doing everything and he's not telling anybody that he's doing it.
Listen,
that's really the thing about communicating the message. I mean, why doesn't he do a weekly press conference where he gets up rather than Karine Jean-Pierre, who, let's be honest, is not very good? She's a wonderful person in so many ways, but when it comes to being the voice or the face of this administration, she really can't quite do it. She just misses, and it's a shame because there's a lot to celebrate right now.
Look, I think I go back to this basic point that we have to completely rethink the way that we are in this information space. I think that we're operating sort of in an old paradigm. And, I think you're starting to see the Biden administration step by step, get better and better. But it's so important, right? I mean, we have such a powerful story to tell. We've made the country so much better. We have to have more faith and confidence in ourselves. And, part of what I'm doing with my work, and I have these presentations you can see on my YouTube channel, where I tell the history I tell a story with this presentation I do with Democrats, Things Get Better, about how much better Democrats have made America going back over the last 100 years, how much better we've made the world. I mean, it's a story about us and who we are and what we've done. And I think I'm doing this work because I think Democrats have been living in a red wave, right? We've been told that we're woke and leftist and we burn cities down and all these things, and we have to liberate ourselves from the right-wing noise machine and all the horse shit that they're spreading every day, and recognize that we're part of arguably the most virtuous political project in world history. I mean, the Democratic Party has done, by building the world that we know today, based on the four freedoms from FDR's speech in 1941. We're living in a golden age in human history. There's never been a better period to be alive in all human history than it is today for the people of the world. And the Democratic Party did that. We did that. And we have to understand the greatness of our work and recognize that part of what Russia and China are doing now is attacking that system that has created so much opportunity for so many in unprecedented ways. And so we are being called. I mean, the description I have for this is that, our party was called once before to defeat authoritarianism and to ensure freedom and democracy prevailed. We're being called again. And I think that the enormity, I think, of the conflict that we're in, I think is going to start becoming much clearer to voters in this country in the coming months. I think that Biden has been, I think, a little reticent in some ways about really explaining the severity and the gravity of what's happening in Ukraine. And that I think we're going to start to understand this. I think the fact that the Chinese, I won't go too detailed about this, but the Chinese now appear to be giving the Russians arms, and that there's now some kind of relationship between the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, here you have these two former communist countries that were on the outside of the West and were in oppositional to the West, right, for all those years, now coming back together to try to weaken the West and weaken the American project. It's almost unbelievable, right, if you think about it in terms of the arc of history. But the point is we're in it now, and we have to win. And I think it's going to require, I think the president soon will be coming to us much more forcefully and aggressively and honestly about describing the nature of the conflict that we find ourselves in, and that we may be in for a long time. And I think this is why my view is that the politics of the Democratic Party of the United States are about to go through this sort of very profound change, that he may become a war president or something, hybrid war president, whatever you want to call it, right? This new kind of conflict that we're in. But we're not in peace anymore. And I think we have to figure out a way as a country to really reconcile ourselves to understanding how serious this is, and to repurpose ourselves to understand that this is a battle that we have to win, and that Democrats, I think, have a special role to play in this. I mean, this is sort of our job in the country to lead us to make sure that freedom and democracy prevails, and we're being called again.
I want to ask you about Joe Biden and his candidacy for 2024. We're going to take a quick pause for our sponsor, and then we'll come back and see what Jill Biden had to say on Friday. I'm thrilled to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is Z-Biotics. Engineered by PhD scientists, it's a probiotic drink that breaks down the byproduct of alcohol, which is most responsible for rough mornings after drinking. Because when you drink, a toxic byproduct of alcohol builds up in your unprepared gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that causes you to feel terrible the day after drinking. Well, Z-Biotics produces an enzyme like the one your liver uses to break down the byproduct. You drink a bottle of Z-Biotics before your first drink of alcohol. Now, I tried it for the first time last weekend, and I can honestly say that I felt great the next day. It's real science, it really works, not random plant extracts, not off-the-shelf ingredients, and there's a 100% money-back guarantee if you're not completely satisfied. I recommend getting this 6-pack, and you can get a Z-Biotics discount of 15% with your first order. It's a great deal, and you'll have a couple of extras to share with friends. So click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on the screen right now and use the code WEEKEND at checkout. Go to zbiotics.com/weekend and get 15% off. Simon Rosenberg, First Lady Jill Biden gave one of the clearest indications yet that the president will run for a second term. She said on Friday, there's pretty much nothing left to do but figure out the time and place for the announcement. Now, this is obviously a bit of a bone of contention, isn't it? Because typically in the US, if a president is doing well, then there's no reason to change him as a candidate next time around. But he is a mature gentleman. I say that in the nicest possible way. And he'll be even older. He'll be like 83 by the time that election comes around. So the problem with this is, the way I see it, I don't think he, has any cognitive issues to worry about, far less than Donald Trump. But it's the right weaponizing his kind of staccato delivery that and the memes that they create, which is where a lot of this information warfare is going on. that where they edit together clips of him falling up the steps to Air Force One or whatever, and they will literally make him out to look like, your worst nightmare. I mean, that is very dangerous, isn't it? And is it worth giving them that material to work with?
So I think every candidate has assets and liabilities, right? There's stuff they're good at, stuff they're not so good at. There's no question that Biden's age is going to be a liability. And the question is, will there be enough assets, right, on the balance sheet to make sure he wins? And I think that, to me, we're favored. I think he's going to run, and I think we're favored to win the election next year. And I think the reason why is because in the battleground states that matter the most, we've had 3 consecutive very good elections. And the voters in the battleground know about MAGA. They've looked at MAGA, and they've rejected it 3 times. And we know that the 2 likely Republicans at this point, Trump and DeSantis, are all sorts of MAGA, right? There's MAGA flowing out of their ears, right? DeSantis is more MAGA than Trump in some ways. And
mega MAGA is
mega. Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable what a strategic error I think he's made about the way he's positioned himself. I think he read the room wrong. I talked about that in the Atlantic magazine piece this week with Ron Brownstein. That I think that he thought a red wave was coming, and they made a massive miscalculation about his positioning. And it's just my own view. I could be completely wrong. And 2 years from now, you could have me back when President DeSantis is here and you can mock me. But I just think that people don't understand that in the battleground, this issue of MAGA has been litigated pretty heavily, and it's not broken. It's broken our way. So that means they're starting in a big hole. And in states like Pennsylvania and some of these states in this last election, we got to 53, 54, 55% in a midterm election with high inflation and low Biden approval, which showed how much of a repudiation it was of this kind of politics. And their candidate is going to be one of them. And I think it's a big problem. I mean, there's no way that DeSantis is going to be able to put lipstick on this pig he's building right now, right? Or becoming, and because it's actually who he is, right? It's not an act. It's not, something he's doing to win the Republican primary. And so I think that I view it that structurally, we're favored, and incumbents are always favored, right? There's a bias towards sticking with what you got. And if the economy is doing well next year, and if Putin looked like he's weakened or defeated, Biden's going to have a very compelling case for reelection that I think will be enough to overcome some of the doubts about his age. Because I think some of the stuff you're describing is already baked into his brand. It's already baked into the cake, right? They've already spent years with those videos you're talking about. People know about this. They talk about it. They're worried about it. Right?
But why doesn't he acknowledge it? I mean, wouldn't that be the way to deal with it?
Why
doesn't he make it about him and just turn it on its head? Because that's a great tool for silencing the haters.
I think they're going to figure that out in the way that Reagan did. Right? I mean, that Reagan used his age. I mean, the way I describe this to people is that the president that was elected in 2020 was old, but he was experienced. And that experience meant that he could make the system work and that he could do good with it. So his age was an asset, right? And I think he's going to have to run on that again and say that, look, I'm old. I'm not running around the kind of sprightly way that I did before, but we're in a very complicated time. I'm more experienced in foreign policy than anyone who's served in this office in a very long time, right? That my age is my asset. It's what makes me successful. And that, and I think he's going to be able to make that case successfully if things are going well. If the economy is not doing well next year, and if the war looks like it's not going well, I think he's going to have much harder time to get reelected. And so a lot, to me, for us as a family, what's going to matter most in the next year and a half is that we got to make sure the economy is strong and that we do well in the war. And what's interesting is if you look at what the Republicans are doing now, is they want to blow up the economy through the debt ceiling and prevent, potentially do structural damage to the American economy in order to deny the ability for Biden to be able to say that. And Fox News is now 100% on Russia's side in trying to undermine, support for our effort in there. So Fox and MAGA are now working to deny the ability for Biden to make the case on these two things, with all of their passion and intensity and power right now, right? The debt crisis. Meanwhile, the debt rose under Trump and it's come down every year under Trump, and it's come down every year under Biden, right? They had no problems increasing the debt every year of Trump's presidency. Trump has arguably the worst fiscal record of an American president in American history, right? It's arguable that he managed our debt and deficit worse than any president in the whole history. And now they turn around after he blew the whole thing to pieces. They're now claiming that there's a problem. We can win this argument with them. It's a preposterous argument.
But they're going to lie, and we, I say we, the pro-democracy movement doesn't lie. That's part of the characteristics of these two sides.
But the facts are on our side. I think we shouldn't shy away.
But are the facts relevant?
Are
they to the people that are voting?
Yeah, because people live in this. They live here, and they have lived experience, right? They understand, and the thing is, they won't understand unless we tell them, right? You can't score unless you shoot, right? You can't expect people to have an understanding of something unless you connect the dots for them. And this is where it gets back to the thing we had talked about earlier, which is that, us being more competitive in the information space is essential for us to have the election we want to have in 2024. It's equal to the need to make sure the economy is doing well and we're doing well in the war, right? We also need to get more competitive in the information space because we can't. But I have this is a gut now. I feel the last few weeks that the MAGA Republican thing has gotten hysterical and crazy. And I feel like they're starting to hit a wall of some kind where they just can't maintain the level of bullshit, that they've maintained, and that there's something happening on their side that I don't know that I can completely articulate yet. But to their lack of an agenda, I think the curtain is being drawn on them.
Maybe it was the chaos that we saw in Congress, the fact that they couldn't get themselves together. McCarthy couldn't, had to wait for 18 rounds of voting to get the speakership. I mean, maybe it was those kind of physical representations of chaos that suggested that actually they're not up to running a government at all.
But I think even what happened in East Palestine and in Ohio, the media has to go along the he said, she said, right? The left-right thing, right? It's part of the game, right? They have to do it. But it doesn't mean that the reporters who are going through it aren't aware of how ridiculous the Republican arguments are, right? And I think the East Palestine thing they went over the line. They went way too far. It was absurd what they were doing. And I think that the absurdity and hysterical nature of the debt ceiling, it's just preposterous, right? You explode the deficit and then you blame us. You deregulate the railroad industry and then you blame us, right? Like there's just a point where you start going from a place of acceptable bullshit to a place of ridiculousness. And I think that they are increasingly in a place where the media is going to start, fighting back. And I think that part of the significance of what I did with the red wave in challenging the red wave is that I basically exposed this entire, the sort of the normalization bias that exists in our discourse, where we sort of are discounting the ugliness of MAGA and how crazy they become, which is it happens in our media every day. My whole journey of the red wave was a successful sort of pulling the curtain back from that dance. And I think it happened, and I think people know it happened, and it's embarrassing. I mean, the New York Times did a front page above the fold story about how basically the entire national media got bamboozled. They know this happened. It doesn't mean they've talked about it publicly, right? But the reason Nate Silver attacked me, the reason that the Cook Report attacked me, the reason that other people attacked me, because I embarrassed them, right? And they were threatened by this. And I think that these are intelligent people that don't want to be in a place where they feel like they're lying and that they're spreading
But nobody watches those people anymore. People are not reading these newspapers anymore. Circulation is down.
Yeah.
Networks are not getting the viewership. I mean, that is not where the national conversation is happening. And maybe, being in Washington, as you said at the very beginning of this conversation, that kind of bubble, it does mean that all, not just strategists, but certainly those who are working for the administration, really are living in a world and in a time that is bears no resemblance to where the voters are. And then this is just going to keep happening, isn't it?
It isn't. I mean, it's a fair point, right? But we have to use the tools that we have, right? And, I got asked on a discussion I did earlier today why I'm not on Facebook. And I said, I just find Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook to be an offensive, horrible institution.
I heard that, and I agree.
Yeah, and I said, I know that it's not practical and I should be on Facebook, but I don't. I think Mark Zuckerberg was responsible for helping destroy the world, and I'm just not. And I'm starting to feel that way about Elon Musk, and I'm, my relationship with Twitter is changing, and I think Anthony, what you're raising is these are really important questions that we don't have answers for. What we do have, though, is that we know we need to innovate, we need to change, we need to get smarter, we need to get louder. We need to let go of the past, and it's what I just did with my own organization. I mean, I did this on purpose, right, to sort of say that it's time for us to jump into this next thing, right, and that we need a new politics that gets us to 55. We need a whole new media strategy that allows us to get louder, given the changing media environment that we're in. We need a new agenda that allows us to make sure freedom and democracy prevail. We're in a period where the old things that we were talking about a few years ago are ceding to this next thing. And what I'm going to try to do is make sure that our family is aware of all these changes that are happening. That's what I've done for 30 years. And so I agree with you. There's not a simple, we need a process, right? And I think that, I want to give the White House credit. I do think they had MeidasTouch and a lot of the other new media groups to the White House in September for a day-long policy thing. They're doing,
and they have a very good social media person.
They've got very good social media team,
right? Who was doing some excellent Twitter posts. Who was really calling out the misinformation. I mean,
for the first time,
why not more of that?
For the first time, I mean, we had 2 weeks ago. We had this White House thread that looked a lot like my threads, frankly, by the way, but which is fine. Which I forget what the issue was. Where the White House, it was on the debt ceiling, I think, where they just went by point and repudiated. And it was on the White House official feed. I mean, we'd never seen anything like that before. And so I do think that the White House is taking really critical steps, but it all has to happen faster and with more intensity. And I also think that if Biden does run for reelection, what he's got to figure out, I think part of the way they have to rethink the communication strategy is he has to be the chairman of the board, and there has to be 20 other people with him communicating with him. That we have to acknowledge his limitations, particularly in reaching young voters who we need to be voting in much higher numbers. And however we construct the campaign in the government, in the way that we saw young Pete Buttigieg, doing his thing yesterday, dominating the national news, he needs to be the chairman of the board, and he can't be also, or he can be conducting the orchestra and not playing all the instruments. There has to be, I think, there has to be an unusual way of us selling the president that isn't really about making 90% of the camera time on him. Yeah. He has to be the leader of a powerful movement of important leaders who are going to govern the country for the next 20, 30 years.
But he already has a really good staff. I mean, I saw Alejandro Mayorkas being interviewed a couple of days ago because they're talking about trying to impeach him. He's a very eloquent, very intelligent person, and when he was asked the question, do you take this seriously, this idea of you being impeached? I was expecting him to go, nah, they're idiots. But he went, of course I take it seriously. And that was very impressive. But, Pete Buttigieg is in the newspapers because he was 2 weeks late to the Ohio derailment. I mean, this was a major problem for the Democrats. It's been weaponized by Republicans. And Buttigieg actually admitted that he kind of screwed up and, should have been there sooner. I mean, optics these days are almost more important than the detail. And the detail was that, the agencies were there within hours of the derailment. Yeah. But who cares about agencies? Yeah. People want to see the stars.
It gets back to what we've been talking about the whole show, is that we have to just do our politics differently, right? We have to understand that every day they get up trying to own the media space, to put us on the defensive. They lie, they're loud, they push stuff in. We can't be reacting all the time, right? I mean, in 2018...
But why give them rope? You know, why give them rope?
Well,
I mean,
there's two ways.
Buttigieg is a young man. He should have known. Did someone stop him from going on day one or day two?
I think some of this has to do.
Behind that?
I think some of this has to do also. There's a new chief of staff and decision making, and But yes, you're correct. Right. This is exactly what we're talking about, which is that we have to understand the information environment that we're in. And if we don't do better at it, we're not going to have the kind of election and presidency that we want. And this is a very good example, right? That there should have been an awareness that once they started down this road of blaming us, there needed to be a forceful response immediately, right? Because in the old war room, and this is where I think the Biden world is in an interesting place and where it diverges a little bit from kind of the war room theory of communications. The theory of the war room is that any attack that was unrebutted stuck. And I think there is this view in Biden world that there are things that are of secondary importance that they can just sort of ignore and they'll go away.
Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with that. Right? I mean,
Nobody agrees with that.
No, I mean, I'm in a little bit of a different place, right? I'm a war room guy.
Right.
You got to contest everything every day, right? And you got to contest it forcefully. And the thing is, in most cases, we are actually right and they're wrong, and we're speaking truth and they're making stuff up. And that contrast to your point about the State of the Union, where Biden kind of like laid it all out there for everybody. We need to be doing this every day, and the cabinet has to be kind of let off their leash to be a little bit more forceful and aggressive and leading response. It doesn't have to come from the White House. It can come from the agencies. He's got a powerful team. He's built an incredible cabinet. They've been there now, many of them, for several years, so they know their issues really well. This is what I mean. He has to be the conductor of the orchestra. He can't play all the instruments. We've got to think about the way that we communicate with the American people in a far more aggressive way. And then finally, I want to say one other thing, getting to your point, is that I think there was a theory of the White House's communication that Biden did the national media and the cabinet did local media. And I think that's not right.
Maybe in the 90s.
Yeah, no. And as somebody who frankly invented that strategy for our party 30 years ago and developed, I was involved in creating talking points and creating strategy. This is what we did in the Clinton campaign. There was massive innovation around political communications. We have to contest the national environment every day in every way. And it's not this division between national and state and local. I mean, to some degree, one of the reasons we did so well in the battleground was the Biden administration flooded the battleground with cabinet secretaries and media every day. They were talking to local media in these markets. And there was you can see the benefit of that, right? I mean, there was more of an understanding of what Biden had done as president in the battleground than there was outside. However, the Buttigieg thing, to your point, is a great example. If he had done that presser 2 weeks ago, we would have denied oxygen to this ridiculous narrative that developed. And we're going to have to get quicker and smarter. The pace of this has to be immediate. This is why Twitter is so important, right? Twitter is really an important place to see memes develop in real time. You can watch them grow. It's an early indicator, right, of stuff that's going to come. And the administration is going to need to, I think, be in the day-to-day information war in a far more aggressive way over the next year and a half. I think they want to. And I think even just the Buttigieg press conference was a step forward in them getting more comfortable in this more shared responsibility of of being in the information environment every day.
But, the phrase war room has been stolen by Steve Bannon now, because that's the name of his podcast,
I know.
Tragically.
I know.
And I have no doubt that it was Steve Bannon who probably said to Donald Trump, get down there, take a load of MAGA hats with you, go to McDonald's and buy everyone McDonald's and tell everybody that you know the menu better than the people working there.
Yeah.
I mean, that became the story of the Ohio derailment. Pete Buttigieg was there for the, too little, too late. He was very good when he got there, but that's not the point. Trump beat him by 24 hours, and Trump isn't even the president. He's actually a twice impeached president who is being investigated for multiple crimes, and he still went there and stood behind a podium.
And he deregulated the industry, and I mean, it's just the whole thing. I mean, it is absurd, right? It's all.
But they're winning, Simon.
I don't know that they are winning.
I
don't agree with you on that. I think that we just had a great election, and that we overperformed all expectations, and that because in part people are aware of their game and their bullshit, right? And I think so. I don't think they are winning. I just want to say that I think that we're doing well, but we have to do better. And I think that, I've laid out an agenda for how I think we have to do better, new issues in conversation, new media strategy. We have to think differently about how we approach our elections. And then I will say one thing for your viewers that I think is really important is that, and I've said this before, is that what's really changed, one of the things that gives me so much hope, right? Hopium, I was called a hopium purveyor in the election, is that is the power of the grassroots that's developed. Your listeners, the people that listen to MeidasTouch, who are patriots, who love their country, who are desperate for a better politics, they are giving more money. Our candidates have more money than they've ever had, 3-4 times the amount of money they used to have. It's incredible how big our campaigns have gotten. And what that allows us to do is control the information environment. It allows us to define them as being out of the mainstream. But it's also allowing us to build these unprecedentedly large grassroots efforts, which are driving turnout up. We did better in the early vote in 2022 than we did in 2018, 2020, kind of unimaginable outcome in this election. And I just want to say hats off to your viewers and your listeners for giving a shit, right? And for, wanting to stay in the game. I mean, I've already given presentations to 8 different groups, these grassroots groups, since the beginning of January, since 6 weeks, because they haven't stopped. They're still going, right? And they're still doing events, and they're raising money, and they're getting ready, right? And there's this intensity in the family, and that is, I don't think we've talked about it enough. I mean, it's part of what's fueling the success of MeidasTouch, right, and your show. And it's really it's sort of small d democratic, very de Tocquevillian, right? Because many of these groups are organic and grew up during COVID and are Zoom based. But there's been a revival. There's been a resurgence or revival of citizen engagement in our politics. That's a big, big story that isn't being told properly. And
it's because there's so much at stake, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah,
because,
there's so much at stake, and the thing is, the barrier to entry for participation in our politics has been lowered dramatically. You can give money to any candidate now. You can be in a discussion like this over Zoom, sitting in your kitchen while you're making dinner for your kids, right? Zoom has been a huge innovation for us because it's allowed regular people to be in these kinds of conversations in a way that they never had access to before, right? It's why MeidasTouch is exploding, right? And so there's a really powerful thing happening. And I think if we're getting to the end, if I can sort of leave, get as we close with this hope of, this note of incredible optimism, is that we are being saved by the American people, right? The American people in a time of crisis are standing up and working to protect their country. They're giving the money, they're writing the postcards, they're doing all the work that's required. But now we have to do more, which is we have to get work with you and with MeidasTouch and with Tara McGowan at Courier Newsroom. And we need to be more competitive in the daily information space. And I think my view, and this is as a professional, that the biggest advancement we can make in the next 2 years is if 1 million people decide that they're going to be in the information space every day and become networked and amplified the way the right is. We are not networked and amplified. We know this from data. You can study this stuff online. There's ways to track the way that information moves. Their side is very networked and amplified. Something comes out of Fox, goes to 1 million people. Those people spread it through their networks. We don't have that.
Yeah, and people repeat it.
Yeah, they repeat it. They repeat it, right?
Thing, yeah.
We don't have that. We don't have a networked and amplified. We don't have a war room, a modern war room. We need to, and so what I'm asking everybody who's listening is sign up to be an information warrior. You send out this show to 50 of your friends, right? Whatever it is, recognize that we have to be louder in the information space in order to have the election we want to have the country we want to have. This loudness imbalance, their information superiority is a huge problem. And I think we have more agency and control over this than we understand. And I'm challenging just regular citizens to do more to help us compete in the information space, because these millions of people who've given the money, written the postcards, have already done so much. They've already proven that they can change our politics. Now we've got a little bit more we need to do.
I have a very final point and question for you, which is that Lauren Boebert, everybody's favorite politician right now,
Yeah.
she tweeted the weekly reminder, as she does, that the United States is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic. And she, pushed this out to her million or so followers. What would you say to people who have kind of lost sight of what a democracy, because as we know, for those who don't know, that this is a constitutional republic that operates as a democracy, right? So, and I come from a country that is a kind of social democracy, which has free healthcare, but it's very nuanced. But the point is that because democracy is also part of the word Democrat, have said several times on this show before that it seems like democracy seems to be less important to Republicans because the ownership of that word is kind of caught up in the name Democrat. Do you think that's a problem for democracy and this kind of idea of having a free vote and not having an autocracy going forward?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it that way, and about whether or not, my own view from having got into politics when Reagan was still president, which was a long time ago now, and watched the transformation of the party of Lincoln and Reagan to being the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Steve Bannon, which has been one of the great tragedies of the modern world, is that they've become fundamentally illiberal. Right? I mean, on a fundamental level, they just don't abide by rules. They don't think laws apply to them. They think they have special arguments and dispensations, that they can steal a Supreme Court seat. They can, get the Supreme Court to install their own president in 2000. They can accept the help from the Russians, and that's okay, right? Because, whatever it takes to defeat the radical left. The debt ceiling is a form of cheating, right? There's become this sort of contempt for the rule of law, for sort of the things that make democracies work. That is so, it's sort of the central part of their politics. And I think that this was a descent. I talked earlier today about how this all began, I think, with Bush v. Gore, and them learning they could win an election without actually getting more votes, right? And then I think it began sort of the descent of the right into this illiberal force. I mean, there are many pieces of this. But the key to all this is this sort of white tribalism now that has gripped the Republican Party. And they know they're a minority. And so therefore they have to use extraordinary means in order to keep power. I mean, this is a really fundamental problem that we have. And a lot of people have written about this among, in the smart circles, right? There's a lot of discussion about this. But I don't think we really understand that tribalism, which Trump sort of put into our politics, this from having come from the UK, that the reason that the United States was created the way it was created was essentially to create a politics that allowed societies to move beyond the sectarianism that had sort of ravaged Europe for hundreds of years, right? Catholic and Protestant, right? Pulled, England apart, pulled other countries apart. There have been hundreds of years of sectarian conflict in families and countries and communities. And that really what America was about, the reason the founding principle of the United States was sort of religious tolerance, was creating a world where sectarianism or tribalism, right, wasn't the dominant thing, that we all were together. We were all one, right? E pluribus unum, right? That we could reconcile. What Trump has done, the huge pernicious thing that he's done, is that he's instilled a sense of tribal warfare and tribalism into our politics. And tribalism is more powerful than democracy. Tribalism pulls democracies apart. It pulls countries apart. It pulls communities apart. It pulled Ireland apart, right? You can go down the list. And I'm very worried, just personally, that this sort of sense of tribalism that is now really, it's their whole politics, right? Everything flows from it, right? Including the cheating. We can do anything, we have to save the Christian nation, so all available tools are available to us, right, including stealing a Supreme Court seat, blah, 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 right, is that this is how democracies end. Right? This is how democracies end, is through, because tribalism is a higher calling than the country. And what we just saw this week was Marjorie Taylor Greene, right, expressing the tribal desire to split the country apart, right, because she doesn't want to live with us. She wants her tribe to go get their place and the other tribe, the woke tribe, to go get their place, and we should separate, right? And so the tribalism, as I've argued in my own writing, in my commentary, is how it all ends. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. There's no break on what we're seeing. And so it's why, I don't know how we get out of this, right? Other than we have to discredit this tribalism, this white nationalism, this MAGA, and show to Republicans that it's a stone cold political loser and they got to move on to something else and hopefully become a more traditional center-right party again. But that requires us defeating them definitively in the next election. And it's why, I've made a change in my own life, in my own career, that I can become a better tool to achieve these goals than the institution that I was at previously. But the stakes are high. Anthony, you're right. And, you know from the history of where you came from that, overcoming this sense of tribalism, sectarianism, whatever else, can take a generation, 2 generations. These are debilitating family fights that happen. And, it's why, we've got a lot of work to do. And it's why what you're doing and is so important, and what MeidasTouch is doing is so important. You're being patriots, right? You're trying to bring truth and light into a dark discourse in our country right now. And I want to end by saying thank you for what you do. I'm really honored to be with you. I'm here with you every day. I promote you guys relentlessly in my own political commentary because I'm so blown away and impressed with everything you've built and grateful for what you're doing.
I appreciate that. And I think that, being able to critique your own country, we certainly did that in England all the time. And, we had 3 prime ministers in 2 weeks. I mean, that's kind of how it plays out. But I think it's, people have criticized this show for criticizing America. And, it's not critique, it's wanting to make it better because it can be again. And I think, that's really the source of all this.
Yeah, look, we're big and strong enough to have these honest conversations. You're a little tough, but that's okay. Tough but fair, as they say. And and I think that, look, I remain wildly optimistic about our future, about the ability for us to defeat MAGA, but it's also, we're only going to win if we have the right strategy and we go fight. And I think we have work to do to improve. Your point, where we agree with incredible intensity, is we're not there yet, and we got a lot of work to do. And I look forward to doing it with you guys.
Okay. Simon, thank you so much. Really, genuinely appreciate you, and good luck with your new ventures, which will come out of the other side of your new kind of career.
Yeah. Thank you.
And see you hopefully again sometime on this show. I'm Anthony Davis. Please subscribe to The Weekend Show on YouTube or as an audio podcast. And don't forget to visit patreon.com/5Minute News for exclusive Patreon-only videos, bonus content, live Q&As for members. So subscribe for some exclusive access. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.